Hello everyone, and welcome to a video that's a bit different to usual, but not that different if you've been watching my channel for the last year or so. Last year, I basically had a big handful of movies that I hadn't reviewed yet that I wanted to talk about, but unfortunately didn't have the time to do full-length reviews of, so I decided to quickly review all of them in one quick video. And the same thing has kind of happened again, roughly around the same time of year as well. So that's basically what this video is. I'm going to run through a load of movies that I've had the chance to catch up on or that I've recently seen and I won't get time to do full-on reviews for, and I will quickly review them in this video for you. Got it? Good. So without any further ado, I'll get straight into it, and the first movie I want to talk about is Rocketman, directed by Dexter Fletcher. Most of you should know by now that this is the biopic of Elton John, who is a person whose music I quite like, actually. I've grown up listening to a lot of his stuff, and I like a lot of his songs, and the fact that this movie pretty much fully embraces Elton John's over-the-top and slightly exaggerated persona works for the better in this movie. Now, a lot of people have compared it to Bohemian Rhapsody, and to be honest, that was going to be inevitable. But you kind of can't help but compare the two, because this does a lot of things much better than Bohemian Rhapsody did. Bohemian Rhapsody did feel like almost a bullet point version of what Freddie Mercury's life was. Like, it was like the Notes version, like that happened, then this happened, and then that happened, and then they get performed at Live Aid. That's literally what Bohemian Rhapsody felt like at times, whereas Rocketman kind of does a similar thing, but it flows in a much more better way and a much more accessible way that means you're able to enjoy it, rather than it just being blatantly obvious that you're kind of getting the bullet point version of Elton John's career. The music is brilliant, as always, but obviously the versions that they do for this movie are really good as well. Again, they really do embrace that over-the-top nature that Elton John embraced whenever he was on stage, and I think the movie works much better because of that. The movie doesn't take itself too seriously, which is, again, another thing that I liked. It kind of has this almost fantastical feel to it, especially during some of the musical numbers, because you'll have some scenes that play out very normally, and like they're very dramatic, they're just personal, person-to-person moments. And then all of a sudden a musical number breaks out, but works in place of the characters conveying their emotions. And I thought that was a really clever thing. They do it a few times throughout the movie, and I really did appreciate that. Also, this movie does not hold back in terms of what Elton John did. Elton John was a drug addict, and he was addicted to alcohol, and he was a bit of an arsehole to people as well. And the movie does not shy away from that. I would have liked to have seen them go a bit deeper, but that being said, the movie still doesn't shy away from it and shows you, what some things of what happened. Whereas, again, Bohemian Rhapsody decided it didn't want to do that. Even though Freddie Mercury was very famously into drugs, into alcohol, into sex, and all that sort of things, and again, he was a bit of an arsehole to people. But in Bohemian Rhapsody, you don't really get a sense of that, and they play it very safe, and they kind of skim over that aspect. Whereas in Rocketman, they show it front and centre in a few different points, and I really appreciated them for doing that. His life wasn't squeaky clean, and you see that in this film. Also, I can't not mention Taron Egerton's performance. His performance is absolutely brilliant in this movie. By far, it's a career best performance for him. He absolutely breathes and looks like Elton John in this film. There were some points where I was looking at him and I was like, this isn't Taron, this is Elton. And I was really impressed by what he had to offer here. Jamie Bell I also really liked as Elton's key songwriter. I thought he had a lot to do in this movie, and I really liked where they took his character as well. In the end, Rocketman gets an 8.5 out of 10. This is one of the more entertaining movies I've seen all year, and I'm really ashamed that I didn't see it in the cinema, because I really wanted to, but unfortunately I missed it and only got a chance to watch it recently. Next up is the new Roland Emmerich movie Midway. Now, usually I couldn't give a shit about Roland Emmerich movies. A lot of the films he's made in his career have been very shit, with the exception of the original Stargate, Independence Day, and The Day After Tomorrow. Everything else is either mediocre or really, really bad. That being said, though, I had a specific reason I went out of my way to go and see Midway. I'm a sucker for anything set during World War II or that era of time. I find anything from World War I to the Cold War, anything that happened in that era, I find incredibly fascinating for some reason. And also, I'm a sucker for a good war movie. So this movie kind of had the whole package right there, because if you don't know, Midway is supposed to be about the pivotal battle that happened in the Pacific during World War II, which was the Battle of Midway. And the last time this was properly shown in a film was in another movie called Midway, which was back in the 60s. So I was interested to see what Roland Emmerich could bring to this movie, and for the most part it is a pretty decent and enjoyable movie, but it is so flawed in many, many different areas. I will get the positives out of the way. The battle scenes are very entertaining to watch. Yes, they do rely heavily on CGI, but they are still well executed. And there's a lot of points where you actually see, because, like, if you don't know, the Battle of Midway was primarily this battle that took place over the water, where American planes were trying to bomb Japanese aircraft carriers. And there's a lot of instances in the big battle scenes throughout this film where the pilots actually miss quite a lot. Now, in a lot of movies like this, especially if it was, like a war movie set in the, made in the 90s, they would have that, cliched thing where they'd miss once and then get it right every single time after that, just to build suspense, but it's also really cliched and kind of cheesy. This movie instead goes for a more realistic approach, in the sense that they miss actually a good couple of times, and it does make it more believable, because not everybody's going to hit it directly the first time, and I like that whole aspect of some of the battle scenes. The performances in this movie are okay. Patrick Wilson was really good. Woody Harrelson was also really good, but unfortunately the two main actors that get the most screen time anyway they've been better, basically. And it's not their performances are absolutely fine. It's their accents, basically. Luke Evans and Ed Skerrin play the two main characters, so to speak. Well, the two characters that get the most screen time anyway. And they're British actors, putting on very old-timey American accents. Luke Evans, his accent is okay, but Ed Skerrin can go really over the top with his like, hey, I'm in a war here, hey, I'm trying to shoot down the bad guys. It can be a bit over the top and quite annoying at times, but he's playing a real person, so you just kind of have to presume, right, that's what that person sounded like. And while I'm at it, I will say one thing that bugged the fucking shit out of me throughout this movie, is that halfway through the film, they address this subplot involving Aaron Eckhart's character. And for a good 5 to 6 minutes, you are following that subplot, because it seems somewhat important. And then after that subplot finishes kind of abruptly, you're kind of left thinking, right, they're going to cut back to it at some point to resolve it. It just kind of ends abruptly where you're not quite sure where that character's going to go. But it never cuts back to that subplot at all, until you get the information that appears at the end towards nearer the credits, like most historical movies do, where it's like, this person ended up doing this, this, and this, and got this medal. That's the next time you see what happened to that character, and it thoroughly pissed me off, because when that subplot when it cut away from it, I was expecting it to cut back because I wanted to know what happened to those people. I didn't know what happened. So the fact that you don't find out until literally right at the end before the credits did piss me off a little bit. That being said, though, this is still a very enjoyable movie that is very by the numbers in every way possible and can be very overdramatic and cheesy at times. I'm going to give Midway a 5.5 out of 10, but it is one of those movies where if it was on the TV at some point or if it was on Netflix, I would happily sit down and watch it again because for the most part it is very entertaining and actually decently well paced as well. Next up is Toy Story 4, another movie that I desperately wanted to see when it was in the cinema, but unfortunately I've only recently got a chance to see it, and it is really good. I don't know whereabouts I'd place it if I was ranking all the Toy Story movies, but this one is definitely up there, and the fact that they've made 4 consistently good movies in a row is impressive, to say the least. The animation in this movie is fucking stunning. There are points in this movie where it looks photorealistic, and I had to keep reminding myself that it was an animated movie, but Pixar have definitely, they've upped their game with the animation with each film they release. The themes that this movie has are really sweet, and I really liked the way that those themes developed throughout the movie. The ending had me in tears. I do think it is slightly better executed of an ending than, say, Toy Story 3 is. Don't get me wrong, the ending to Toy Story 3 is very emotional and is very good, but there are times where it can feel a bit too cheesy. The whole, the poignancy of that final scene in Toy Story 3, it still hits hard every time you watch it. But there is something about it that does feel slightly a bit too cheesy, whereas the ending for Toy Story 4 is one of those endings where, it has to happen, but you don't want it to happen. So you've just kind of got to accept it and let it happen for these characters to, carry on with their lives. And the way it went about it just felt a lot more genuine than the ending of Toy Story 3, and I really liked what they did. Another thing that I liked is how they treated the bad guy. Bad guys in the Toy Story series can kind of be a little bit one note, even though they can be really good. For example, Stinky Pete and Lots of Lovin' Bear, they're both really good villains, but at the end of the day, outside of their main motivation, at the end of the day, they are just bad guys. But in Toy Story 4, I won't say what specifically, but they kind of change the motivation of the bad guy in this film. Well, they don't change the motivation, so to speak, but they set up one thing with the bad guy and then do a complete U-turn as to why you thought they were doing the thing in the first place. And I really liked what they did here. And it just felt nice to see something as refreshing as that in a Pixar movie. But yeah, I really liked this movie. I thought it was really enjoyable. Forky is adorable. I loved it. And that's another thing. Every single new character in this movie felt incredibly welcome, and I loved every single one of them. I will happily give Toy Story 4 a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed this film. The next movie is Cold Pursuit, the Liam Neeson comedy action thriller that unfortunately came out at a very bad time because unfortunately not many people at the time of this movie's release were talking about the film. They were instead talking about that interview that Liam Neeson gave that made him come across as a racist. And I mean, I have my own opinions about that interview, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the film. And the film is not that bad, actually. It's very enjoyable, has its moments where it's absolutely hilarious, and it has its moments where the action is really well executed. But my main issue with Cold Pursuit is that it doesn't know, there are times anyway, where it doesn't know whether to fully commit to its comedy side or its thriller action-y side. Apart from that, though, this is a very well-made movie that has some decent performances, but most of all, it has some really specific moments that do stand out as being either incredibly funny or incredibly tense. Yeah, outside of that, there's really not much else to say about Cold Pursuit. I'd happily watch it again in an instant, which is why I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. It's an enjoyable movie, what can I say? The next movie is Booksmart, yet another film that I desperately wanted to see in the cinema but unfortunately missed, and I've only recently seen it. I really like this film. And I was scared I wouldn't like it, considering how hyped up it was at the time of its release. But I do really like it, and I do feel that it is a movie that improves the more it goes on. At least in my opinion anyway, it gets funnier and better the more it goes on, to the point where by the end of the movie, I really did start caring for these characters a lot more than I did at the start, because that's one thing I will say. The start of this movie, at least the first few scenes anyway, do feel a tad disjointed, as if like, right, we have this thing and we don't quite know what we're trying to do with it, or like what style we're going for. But as soon as the main plot and focus of the movie kicks in, it gets a lot better the more it goes on, and finds its stride very, very quickly. The visuals in this movie are also very refreshing, especially for a teen comedy like this, and they can also be quite creative at times, and I really like that whole aspect of the movie as well, showing that Olivia Wilde can really direct, and that's another thing. For her directorial debut, she really does knock it out the park here, because she really does deliver some really cool looking visuals that also add to the story as well, and I really liked what she did for this film. Also, the two lead actresses are fucking brilliant in this movie. The chemistry they have with one another is fantastic, and they bounce off of each other so damn well. If I had to point out any issues with the movie, the soundtrack can be very overbearing at times. There are some points where it works really well and is very effective, but there are other points in the movie where you just kind of want the soundtrack to shut the fuck up and let the scene speak for itself. But yeah, apart from that, this is a very enjoyable movie, and I'm glad I've finally seen it. I will happily give Booksmart an 8 out of 10. The next movie is Dolemite Is My Name. I don't really have much to say about this one, outside of it being a very entertaining biopic of this guy who you either do or don't know. Rudy Ray Moore was basically this guy who basically did everything he could to be in the position that he did, and the position that he ended up being was this kind of cultural icon in the black community for being both a comedian and also a movie star. And this movie is quite interesting, to say the least. That's the most you can, like, if you love or hate this film, that's at least the one thing I think you can take from this film. The story and the way it's told and the way it unravels is genuinely very interesting, and I thought this movie was quite enjoyable for the most part, and this is definitely one of Eddie Murphy's best performances. It's nice to see him back in a movie like this again, because I've kind of missed him. I think we've all kind of missed him in films like this, and this movie really does showcase every single aspect and every single talent that guy has. So yeah, in that sense, he really, really does a good job. Yeah, this is a really enjoyable movie. If you get the chance, watch it. It's on Netflix. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. There's really not much else I can say about this film. It's good. It has a load of good performances. It's quite entertaining, and it's quite funny in points. The last movie I want to talk about is Rip Up the Road, which is a brand new documentary about the UK-based rock band Foals. I quite like this documentary, but that being said, I'm slightly biased considering I've liked the band for many years. I even own a few of their albums, and that's all I can really say about this film. Obviously, it's going to appeal more to fans of the band, but that being said, the way it's executed, the way it's edited, and just the overall presentation of the movie, I do feel like there is some there is some watchability for those who are just, casual viewers who may not have heard of this band before, or are just, semi-familiar with their music. So I do think you can watch it as a fan, but you also can watch it as just a normal viewer anyway. That being said though, watching it as a fan, I did find this documentary very fascinating. It's about 50% a concert movie and 50% them on tour and you looking at like their behind the scenes stuff and them talking to the camera very honestly. And I definitely preferred more of the tour-based things. The concert stuff is good because it's taken from a concert they did at Alexandra Palace earlier in the year. And that stuff is quite cool to look at, but it's definitely the more hot one-to-one moments that drive this movie forward and, you know, propel the movie along. The best thing for me, anyway, was seeing this new side to each of the band members that I'd never really seen before. They all feel like genuine, normal people. Because I know some people, when they've been in a band like that for quite some time, can develop an ego of some sorts and can kind of feel bigger than they actually are and can kind of be not very nice to watch. Whereas each member of Foals, whether it be Yanis, Jack, or Jimmy, feel genuine and they're completely honest with how they feel about the state of music at the moment and whether that their band is still somewhat relevant at the moment. They're all incredibly honest about things like that, and it just adds this new layer to those guys and the band in general that feels very refreshing and very genuine. If I had to nitpick about this movie, I would say that it slightly loses momentum during the middle of the film, but then it thankfully picks back up again towards the end, but that's literally it. That's the only flaw I can really give for this movie. If you're a fan of the band, you've probably already seen this documentary, but if you're also not a fan of the band, or if you've never even heard of Foals before, I still recommend you give this documentary a watch because it is very interesting. And it's just a nice watch. That's basically how I can sum it up. I'm also going to give this one a 7.5 out of 10. Again, this is definitely one of those documentaries that I'll probably revisit at some point in the future. Kind of because I like the band a lot, but, you know, that's beside the point. So guys, that was another review roundup. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to, comment down below and let me know what you thought of some of the films that I talked about in this video. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.